Imagine standing on the docks of Amsterdam in the 1600s. Ships the size of castles tower over you, their sails snapping in the wind, each one loaded with spices, silks, and treasures from lands most Europeans had never even heard of. For the first time in history, a single company was richer and more powerful than some nations. But how did this company, the Dutch East India Company, or VOC, rise to dominate the seas and create the world's first global corporation? What kind of ruthless tactics did they use to secure their monopoly? And why did this empire of unimaginable wealth collapse into bankruptcy? The Dutch Republic in the early 1600s was a small nation fighting for survival against Spain. But it had one great advantage. Its merchants and sailors were some of the most daring in Europe. When Portugal's monopoly on the spice trade began to falter, the Dutch saw an opportunity. In 1602, several competing Dutch trading ventures were merged into a single enterprise, the Verenigde Oostindische Compagnie, or VOC. Backed by investors, it became the world's first publicly traded company, issuing shares to raise money. In today's terms, it was the birth of the stock market, and the VOC was its crown jewel. What made the VOC unique was its power. Unlike normal businesses, the Dutch government gave it near-sovereign authority. The company could sign treaties, mint coins, build forts, and even wage war. This wasn't just a trading house. It was a private empire with cannons and armies. At its height, the VOC controlled trade routes stretching from the Cape of Good Hope to Japan. Its most valuable prize was the spice trade from Indonesia, particularly nutmeg, cloves, and cinnamon. Luxuries in Europe worth more than gold. Amsterdam quickly became the richest city in the world, its stock exchange buzzing with investors desperate to share in the profits. But with great wealth came ruthless ambition. The VOC didn't just compete, it eliminated its rivals. To secure their monopoly, the VOC used tactics that shocked even their contemporaries. In Indonesia, they imposed brutal control over spice-producing islands. Entire villages were burned, and populations were massacred or enslaved if they dared trade with competitors. The infamous conquest of the Banda Islands in 1621 left thousands dead, all to secure nutmeg for the company's coffers. The VOC also built a vast network of fortified trading posts, from Batavia, modern-day Jakarta, to the Cape Colony in South Africa. These weren't just warehouses, they were military strongholds, protecting Dutch shipping lanes and projecting power thousands of miles from home. In Japan, the Dutch were the only Europeans allowed to trade, thanks to their willingness to follow strict rules and abandon missionary activities. In India, they competed fiercely with the Portuguese and later the British, using both diplomacy and violence to carve out markets. But their dominance wasn't only about weapons. The VOC pioneered advanced financial tools. They created complex joint stock structures, issued bonds, and offered dividends to shareholders. In the 1600s, their market capitalization was so immense that, adjusted for inflation, the VOC remains the most valuable company in history, worth over $8 trillion in modern terms. This sheer wealth transformed Amsterdam into the financial hub of the world. Merchants, bankers, and even common citizens could own a share of the company, making ordinary people invested in global conquest. Yet behind the glittering facade of prosperity lay a dark truth. The VOC operated on fear, coercion, and blood. Contracts were enforced at gunpoint. Whole populations were uprooted to maintain supply chains. The so-called Golden Age of the Netherlands was built on suffering oceans away. And this ruthless expansion wasn't without consequences. The very brutality that made the VOC powerful also sowed resentment among colonized peoples, creating cycles of rebellion and resistance that would plague the company for centuries. By the 18th century, the VOC's power was waning. The spice trade was no longer as profitable, as crops spread to other regions, driving down prices. Competition with the British East India Company intensified, and the Dutch found themselves outmaneuvered in India and beyond. Corruption ate away at the company's efficiency. Ships were poorly maintained, accounts were manipulated, and officials siphoned off wealth for themselves. Wars with rival European powers drained resources, and maintaining far-flung colonies became more costly than profitable. The company that once dictated terms to kingdoms now struggled to pay its debts. By the late 1700s, the VOC was a shadow of its former self. Its debts outweighed its profits, and its once mighty fleet was in decline. In 1799, after nearly 2 centuries of dominance, the company was formally dissolved. Its territories and assets were taken over by the Dutch state, marking the end of the world's first corporate empire. The VOC left behind a complicated legacy, a pioneer of global capitalism and financial innovation, but also a ruthless colonial power that exploited and oppressed millions. The story of the Dutch East India Company is both inspiring and cautionary. It shows how vision, ambition, and innovation can create unimaginable wealth, but also how greed, corruption, and violence can bring even the greatest empire crashing down. The VOC was more than a company. It was a symbol of humanity's drive for power and profit, no matter the cost. Its rise and fall still echoes in the global corporations of today. History has no shortage of strange and extraordinary stories like this one. And if you found the tale of the Dutch East India Company fascinating, you'll definitely want to watch our video, Could U.S. Marines Overthrow the Roman Empire? It's a wild exploration of what happens when modern firepower collides with ancient legions. And it's just as thought-provoking as this story of the world's first corporate empire.